talk that we got. We're going to hear tonight from two very important people.
Say who you are, please.
Okay, I will get to that. I will say her. I am Alicia Moreland Capuia. I am one of the COAB members, and I was asked to help facilitate a conversation tonight on trauma-informed practices and care. And at first I thought I could give it, because in our subcommittee meeting, I did give about a half-hour talk, and it wasn't too cerebral. People were able to take some things away from it, but I wanted to make sure tonight that the public could hear from folks who actually do the work in a very real, effective way. I wanted you to leave here with some tangible things that you could do, and I also wanted the Portland Police Bureau to hear about some specific approaches that potentially could be taken and some considerations that can be made in the work moving forward. So I wanted it to be super effective, and in that, I thought to bring my colleagues and friends from Healing Hurt People Portland. And Healing Hurt People Portland is a very special project that actually about a little over 3 years ago, I sat at the table with Daryl and Maggie Bennington Davis and some folks over at Cascadia and Legacy Health, and we sat down and created this national community-based, hospital-based violence intervention program that was really trauma-informed in its focus. And it's important because it also implements the peer model. We've learned today about peer supports. Well, a big portion of the Healing Hurt People Portland project is that it's trauma-informed and that it also employs a peer model. We have peer specialists that work with young victims of violence who've either been stabbed or shot, and we engage both the victim and families directly at Legacy at the heart of the trauma. So it's what we call golden moment work, and we're gonna hear today mainly about, I want you to take the time to look up Healing Hurt People Portland you can go to the Cascadia website and you just search Healing Hurt People Portland. That's not gonna be the focus tonight. The focus tonight is gonna be on the trauma-informed approach that they take. So with that being said, and you'll hear more about that because I don't wanna take away from their presentation, I have three people to introduce to you tonight. One is Josh Lathan. And Josh is a community health worker. He is also a qualified mental health associate, and he does the real hard work working with young men who have been literally traumatized, either stabbed, shot, or beat up, and he meets them right in the hospital, in the emergency room and in the trauma bay. Then we also have with us Cheryl Johnson. I call her Miss Johnson. Miss Johnson has a master's of education. She is a qualified mental health professional, or qualified mental health associate, a QMHA, and also currently in the process of becoming certified as a health worker, which is amazing. And then we have Sister Dr. Sin Kanai, who is a PsyD, a qualified mental health professional, which means that she has a master's, and also a CADC3. Are you a CADC3? Or did I make that up? And an LPC. She's got like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. That's right. And a licensed professional counselor. And really, the only reason I'm going through the credentials is because when we talked about lived experience, there's a wide variety. There are some folks who have lived experience that you will never even know about, and they bring that heart to the work. And so we have to really expand our definition of what lived experience means. And these are folks who are able to do that tonight and also educate you in this area of trauma-informed care. Now, I'm gonna be beaming as a proud mentor and friend over there on the other side of the room, but they've got me a call a friend card away if they need me right across the way. So if you can all please join me in welcoming this fantastic crew of folks who are gonna talk with you today about trauma-informed care. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Before I delve into the presentation, I would just like to make a request of everyone that you send some positive energy and some positive thoughts. While we were sitting in the back and listening to the previous presentation, we got a call and a notification that a young man has been injured and is currently in surgery. So when this presentation is over, our job will be to go to the hospital and to check on him and hope that everything is okay, and engage his family and see what support we can provide. So thank you for that. So with that, you've heard a little bit about Healing Hurt People and the services we provide. One of the things what we're gonna focus on tonight is the approach. how we deliver those services and why we think that this approach is appropriate and the best approach to take. We're going to talk about what trauma is, what it means to be trauma-informed, and what trauma-informed care or treatment looks like. But the bulk of our presentation tonight will focus on adverse childhood experiences. Many of you may know that commonly by the acronym ACEs. Helping clients to understand their trauma score and understand their ACE scores helps to promote their own healing, but also helps to facilitate resilience in their families. So, what is trauma? Trauma results from an event, a single event possibly, or even a series of events or a set of circumstances. And as we well know, we're most familiar with physical trauma, such as we described that we'll be dealing with later on this evening, that physical trauma from a physical injury. But it's also emotional and can be harmful and threatening, but very important is the lasting adverse effects. And those effects could be things like long-term, like emotional imbalance. In addition to that, flashbacks. There's just a wide range of trauma symptoms. But the thing is that it's overwhelming. People have difficulty dealing with these. And for some people, we know that when we have a tragic situation happens, that there's some symptoms that are normal, but being overwhelmed by those is what causes the long-term adverse reactions that make it impossible or challenging for people to move forward with their lives. Trauma can occur over a lifespan, and as we said, it can be a single critical incident, it can be chronic or cumulative experience. And we're taking a look at what you're seeing now is just a variety of the type of traumas that people experience. Some they experience as individual trauma, some family trauma, but there's trauma that happens to people as a community. And some of that might be the historical trauma that has happened to various communities that we rarely deal with. We rarely deal with some of the cultural and historical traumas that people experience. For example, racism. There's also the trauma that happens from a natural disaster, school violence. We're experiencing these at all ages, and it's happening more and more.
Do you mean like intergenerational trauma?
There's the intergenerational trauma that happens through families as well.
Okay.
Go ahead. So what does it mean to be trauma-informed? To be trauma-informed means viewing trauma through an ecological and cultural lenses, a cultural lens, recognizing that the context plays a significant role in how people perceive trauma. You know, they don't always act the way we expect them to act when they come to care. They don't always look like we expect them to look. In thinking about the presentation we heard earlier, they have visions, they have a whole range of symptoms that makes it challenging. So this is what it looks like, and wanting to be trauma-informed, we have to look at everything that has happened to a person and not just how they present at that particular time. So there are 6 trauma-informed principles, and you'll notice at the top of that list is safety. Ensuring the physical and emotional safety of consumers, customers, clients, but also the safety of our staff, because it takes its toll on those that are providing services, and we can experience vicarious trauma. So safety is at number 1. Trustworthiness. That's huge, because as it relates to our program, many of the young men that are injured, they're victims of a crime. And so when we go to the hospital, there's lots of people around the room. There's the police officers the detectives that are investigating. There's us, there's a whole range of medical staff, everyone wanting to know what happened. And so it's very important. One of the first things that we do is we have to establish ourselves to say, we're not law enforcement. We have to establish the trust. A lot of people that have experienced trauma, they're really leery of authority figures. So being trauma-informed is very important in that establishing trust. And you've heard a lot about peer support. It is really valuable to engage with someone that can relate to your experience. It's important to have someone that understands and can address you and meet you where you are. So, choice, collaboration, empowerment, these next three principles, they are about giving people respect. They're about allowing clients, customers, victims to have a voice. So, when we employ these trauma principles, it may look something like this. Instead of asking someone, what is wrong with you? A more trauma-informed approach is, what has happened to you? And I know some people are eager to help and want to fix the problem, but we talk about being collaborative and giving clients a voice. Instead of, what's your problem? How have you tried to deal with it? Being supportive. How can you, because some people think that they're the ones that have the answer. If you do what I tell you to do or what I'm suggesting to you, then we can fix this. But a trauma-informed approach suggests, how can you and I work together to meet your goals and healing and recovery? So it's a collaborative process. So what is trauma-informed care? Trauma-informed approach to treatment goes beyond just treating the physical wound. And the people that we engage with, the surgeons, they're very good at that piece. But it's also about addressing the emotional wounds. Trauma-informed care recognizes that there are many different forces that impart certain things on people, causing them to be interpreted as bad or as sick. But what patients really, really need is our recognition that they are hurt and need to be healed. So why is trauma-informed care important? It's important because when we adapt the trauma principles, it causes a shift to happen in our attitude. It causes a shift to happen in our practices. It changes the environment in which we provide services. It makes us consider what's important to the client or to the patient or to the victim, that they have strengths and that we value them. It sets us up to have trusting relationships, helpful relationships. So as we get ready to segue into the next part of the presentation, I want to share this, that studies show that 77% of patients who suffer physical injuries resulting from interpersonal violence have full-blown PTSD. And half of those, that same population has experienced adverse childhood experiences. So we want to look at those because it's these adverse childhood experiences that have implications for adulthood. It affects our relationships. It affects our interactions with health services. It affects our health. And that's why we think this trauma-informed approach is important.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Good, I can't hear myself. Oh, there we go. So this next portion of our information education session is about ACEs. How many, show of hands, have ever heard of the ACEs? Right? How many, show of hands, please, has ever taken an ACEs? Guess what? You're going to do one tonight, right? Because if you don't do one, how can you understand what it means, right? So you have to be able to know the language and have to be able to identify those things that are created as ACEs. ACEs and trauma-informed care. The objectives to understand what it is, to understand what ACEs are, to understand the effects, the biological, emotional, and social effects. Also to understand the impact of race, on ACEs, and then to understand something that a lot of people don't talk about, resiliency. So the ACEs was created by these wonderful practitioners, both MDs. Dr. Folletti at Kaiser, he's the smiling, handsome guy on the left, out in San Diego, showing the tan off. And then there's Dr. Anda at CDC in Georgia. They met in 1991 at a brown bag event. They were both looking into some very peculiar things. Dr. Folletti was looking into this group of people that he worked with who were obese. They were doing wonderfully well, lost hundreds of pounds. And then they stopped coming to the research. They just stopped coming. He couldn't understand it. So he did a little post-research survey and found out that a lot of them didn't want to lose any more weight because then they would be vulnerable again. He found out that most of those women in his research, had been victimized sexually as young children. So he was really confused at how he could get to the next cohort of folks to come through and get them to stay into the research project. Dr. Anda over in Atlanta was talking about doing research into disease prevention. Why is it that people know that smoking will give you cancer, COPD, will kill you, make you terminally ill, but you still have this emotional connection to cigarettes? You won't stop smoking. So the two of them got together and did some brainstorming and that kind of stuff. And then in the years 1995 to 1997, they created the ACEs, and then they applied the ACEs to assess childhood exposure to multiple types of abuse, and then to assess an array of high priority health and social problems from adolescent to adulthood. So they wanted to find out why people had decided as adults that it's better for me to be obese and continue smoking and continue drinking and have high-risk behaviors than it is for me to stop those high-risk behaviors. They wanted to find out why in adolescence people decided that, okay, so I'm 17 years old, now I can really start drinking, I don't have to sneak it anymore. And at the age of 35, when unfortunately they have a fatty liver because they've been drinking a fifth of liquor every day, they're still gonna continue that. What has happened to these people that has made them so emotionally attached to their habits? So they took 17,000 participants. And I must say that most of them were middle-class Americans in San Diego. All but a few had graduated high school. Most had gone on to college. Many had advanced degrees. They were all fully insured because they were Kaiser patients. Isn't that a wonderful cohort, right? Can we get that kind of cohort today? No. So this is a self-report, the ACEs, which is why you guys are going to do it. You're not going to share, you're just going to do the ACEs. But once you do them, it's only 10 questions, only 10 questions. And you score from 0 to 10, okay? On average, most people score about a 4. That's kind of serious. And we're going to talk about what those questions are. So the categories are abuse, emotional abuse, parent or adult swearing at a child. You're the stupidest kid I ever saw. I don't even know why you're wasting my time. Whoa. You can't even take out the trash right. Whoa. How many times a day, a week, or a month does a child hear that? Physical abuse, being pushed, slapped, throwing things at children, okay? Hitting a child hard enough to leave marks or injuries. Now, I gotta tell you, there's a whole population in this room here who know exactly what that last one's about, right? They know about going out getting a switch. And if they didn't get the right size switch, then whoever was doing it was gonna get a bigger switch. And then there's that one that makes us all uncomfortable, sexual abuse. And by their definition, that would be Folletti and Anda, it's a person who's 5 years older than the victim, doing any of the touching or fondling in a sexual way, having child touch them in a sexual way, attempting oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse, or actually having it. And now, 20 years later, we have to be concerned about cyber sex. That was not a big concern there, okay? Neglect is a category, emotional, not feeling loved, special, you know, mom, dad too busy working to maintain the house because now rent was $800 a month and next month it's gonna be $1,700 a month to stay in the same 2-bedroom. And what are they gonna do, right? Mom and dad are too busy working because they can't do anything else but try to survive. Physical, not having enough to eat. Well, that could come from the emotional because mom and dad are trying to make ends meet. Or mom by herself, or dad by himself. Having to wear dirty clothes. There is no one else in your family, there is no one in your village to take that place to come in to help you get your basic needs met. Not having someone to take the child to the doctor. Mom and dad can't take off work because if they take off work, they lost their job. If they've lost their job, then they're out of their housing. It's easy. Household dysfunction is always around the female provider, caregiver. So if a child had ever seen their female caregiver slapped or pushed, hurt, something thrown at them, hit repeatedly within a few moments, or even had a weapon, knife, or a gun. Does that sound like anything that goes on today? Okay. Household substance abuse, anybody with a drinking problem, anybody using street drugs, and now, 2016, anybody abusing prescription medications, right? Household mental illness, depressed, mentally ill, attempted and/or completed suicide. Parental separation or divorce. Now, this is one that has, you know, a lot of people going, really? 1995 to 1997, the median age of participant was 57 years old. So that meant they grew up in the 40s, right? So in the 40s, it was one of those societal taboos to be divorced. So if your parents are divorced, it means that your mother was out doing things that she wasn't supposed to be doing, and now you've brought shame on the family. Well, now it's more cultural. In those who identify as white, it's quite common to get married, divorced, remarried, and divorced, and remarried, and you may marry the same person on number 3 that you did in number 1, right? For those who identify as Native American, that's not okay. For those who identify as Hispanic, you're supposed to be married from time to all eternity until death do you part. For those raised in the African American community, we don't even know how to spell marriage half the time. So there is no divorce or separation because mom and dad weren't together to begin with. So we have to look at things in a social context. Yes? Incarcerated member of household. Yes, even in 1995, 1997, there were people whose family members were incarcerated. So up here, and you don't have to worry about straining your eyes, I did the demographics of the 1,700 and plus people. So 968 of them identified as white, and 798 identified as African American, 1,248 identified as Asian Pacific Islander. Well, they're in San Diego, so yeah, they're going to have a higher population of that. But in your handout, you have all of the demographics, so you can look in your handout and get all of that. Next slide.
I'm sorry, would you mind if I ask a question? I wanted to ask about race there. white is so much higher than all of the other demographics, does that have to do related anything with white privilege or abusive privilege?
I think honestly it has to do with location, being in San Diego. You look at the population in San Diego.
That makes sense. Okay.
And so it was representative of the community. All right, so here are some of the results. There were 9,367 men, 7,970 men. Did I say that backwards? Women and men? Uh-huh. It's after 7:30. But for those who experience sexual, emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse, I was surprised that so many men reported, self-reported, 1,225 self-reported sexual abuse. I was truly shocked that only 605 men reported emotional abuse. I think that says something about our society. You just take it and keep on going. You don't even stop to think about what it's doing to you. You just take it and think, just keep on going. So what, your daddy calls you a slug, he calls you lower than pond scum, you just keep on going. Women, we don't necessarily keep on going all the time. Excellent. Neglect, again, it's about even on physical neglect. So that meant, you know, kids are kids, you're not eating, you're not eating. Go ahead. Household dysfunction, mother treated violently. The numbers are pretty good. Almost a 2-to-1 on mental illness for men and women reporting. Can't imagine that in real life. But incarceration, about 487 women and 326 men said that there was someone in their household who was incarcerated. Someone in their household. So that, what is that, 813 people in San Diego. But now let's get clear. Just because you were living in San Diego in 1995 and 1997 does not mean you were born and raised there, particularly with a high population of Asian and Pacific Islanders. And Asian and Pacific Islanders have a really bizarre way, according to US standards, of settling scores. That means if you hurt my sister, and I know you hurt my sister, then I will come to your house in the dead of the night, and I will take the offending person from your home. And probably 2 weeks from now, those body parts will wash up in a plastic bag at a beach park. Okay? That's in 2016. So just know that. All right, so we got kind of kittywampers over here. But out of all the folks there, the highest number reported 4 or more, 1,423 women reported 4 or more ACEs. And when you take your ACEs, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It sounds a little confusing now. But you've got a total of 2,100 people who've reported 4 or more ACEs, which puts them at risk for heart disease, high blood pressure, stroke, risky behaviors such as smoking, increased alcohol use, suicide attempts, mental illness, depression, anxiety, symptoms of PTSD. Okay, next slide. So the ACEs was a really good study, really great study. But as I pointed out, there were some things that needed to be considered that weren't in the ACEs. So just recently, there's this Philadelphia Urban ACE study. Love it. It's lots of pages long, so you didn't get a copy. But you can Google it and get your own PDF, okay? And it does give acknowledgement to the original ACE study. It does give the history to the original ACE study. But what it found out was, and we can go back to slide, what it found out was there are certain categories that urban children experience, certain things they experience in their environments that people in San Diego didn't experience in 95 and 97. No, you go up to the top and minimize. Go up to the top, top bar. There you go. Okay. Right. So the ACE study is actually a collaborative effort that was kind of spearheaded by the Institute for Family Services, next, okay, for Safe Families. And they wanted to implement and acknowledge the experiences of kids that lived in urban settings. So here's some survey methods for those who are really into it. The original ACE study did 17,000 folks. The Philadelphia study did 1,700 folks. Okay, so a much smaller sampling in a very short period. They did it in a year. And their respondents were 18 years or older. And it was done not the way they did the original ACE study. You come on into the research lab and we're going to talk about this stuff. They did it over the telephone. Cell phones and landlines. My, how times have changed for research, right? So the original conventional ACEs are on the left. We've already gone over them. And then the expanded ones, witnessing violence, living in an unsafe neighborhood, experiencing racism, bullying, and foster care. Urban kids get that a lot. I'm not saying rural kids don't get it. I'm not saying those are not factors for rural kids or suburban kids, especially the bullying. I'm not saying that. But there are certainly risk factors that happen quite often in the urban setting. And so the Philadelphia study also looked at the association between racial discrimination and child health. And so they did what we call a meta-analysis, and that means you just take all the research out there and you go through it and you peel through it and you just, compare data and all that good stuff so that you can come up with some nice findings. And so out of all the studies that they did, I'm only going to concentrate on 12 to 18. They did 114 studies. And they found in 114 studies that only 38 of those studies addressed health risk behaviors. 87 studies addressed mental health conditions. Now, some of these overlap. 54 addressed behavioral problems. And only 2 addressed physical health problems because nobody's doing longitudinal studies. They're just doing stuff right now in the moment. So what are the effects of all this stuff that I've been talking about, all these ACEs? Looking at all this stuff that other people have experienced. ACEs are one of those things that causes us to stress out, right? I'm too stressed to hear you. I'm too stressed to see you. I'm too stressed to even know you are in my presence. We all have a stress response. It happens all the time. We're in a calm state, life is good, and then we see an event as a threat or something that gets us all jacked up, like we can't find our keys, we're gonna be late for work, right? I'm gonna get stuck in traffic, I'm gonna be late for work, can't be late for work. So then we go into this fight or flight. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. We find the keys, we get in the car, put on talk radio, put on an MP3, we good, we driving now, we gonna be on time. Maybe a minute late, we're not gonna be late, it's all good. So we go back to calm. But what happens with people who have prolonged exposure and who stay in a state of what we will later call toxic stress, who've experienced many ACEs in their life, is they never get to go back to calm. They kind of stay between calm and fight or flight. They're back and forth like a little pinball. They never get to have their bodies rejuvenate themselves. They never have resting sleep. They never get to that normal state again. So the types of stress, positive, that's short-lived. That's the keys, finding the keys, getting in the car, getting to work. Tolerable stress. Okay, so now you're at the family reunion. And here comes Uncle Joe and Uncle Bob. And they've had too many beers, and everybody knows it. And so everybody knows they're gonna fight. And so everybody's trying to keep them separated, right? Because it's gonna happen, you know it's gonna happen. Well, they go ahead and fight. Everything gets calmed down, put them in the dunk tank, and everybody goes back to the family reunion. Tolerable stress. It's predictable. You know it's going to happen and you know it's going to end. Toxic stress, on the other hand, strong, frequent, chronic exposure to stress. Day in, day out. That's when you're stuck between calm and fight or flight, calm and fight or flight. That's the deadly stuff. That's the stuff that gets us. That's the stuff that we have to go find antioxidants for because we've got free radicals running around in our bodies because we can never get back to relaxed state, to let our bodies heal, to let our minds heal. Oh yeah, and we got souls too. They just don't ever heal with that toxic stress. Implications, neurobiological development. For kids who are exposed to toxic stress, their brains don't develop the way they should be. They don't, because they're too busy in their emotional, and I'm not going into all those, all those technical terms, because that's what I love, neuropsych. But it gets stuck in that emotion center, and instead of being able to send the juices that it needs to the other part of the brain so that it can develop, it just kind of stays here. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Long-term effects, brain functions, body systems. I already talked about that stuff. Stability in relationships. Cheryl talked about that. Homelessness. We talked about that too. Performance at work, because you can't concentrate. And your mental health. So here we go. The brain on the left. I love this. This is an old CDC thing. I used this way back when. Old CDC. On the left, you see the temporal lobes. And so that's where you have some nice functioning. It's related to executive functioning, where you can make good decisions, you can be relaxed, and you can go on about your day and be a normal human being. Those are developed nicely. The one on the right, what do you see? Huge gaps. Toxic, chronic stress, ACEs, trauma, not handled with trauma-informed care. So do you expect the person with the brain on the right to be able to recite the Gettysburg Address? Person on the left probably could. Do you expect the person on the right to be able to give you complex, abstract answers to questions? But see, here's the thing. We can wear the hard hat to show stuff that we know, but we don't have anything to say, hey, my brain didn't grow the way it was supposed to grow because I was exposed to toxic stress. We don't have anything to signal that. Okay. Emotional effects, just talked about those. People who suffer from trauma, complex trauma, toxic stress, believe it or not, have feelings of worthlessness. Much like those people who suffer with mental challenges and emotional challenges, they feel worthless. I'm a burden on society. And then they start feeling shame. And then they say, well, if I don't have any worth, then I'm just going to go out here and do whatever. Social effects. We talked about that. Diminished language, traumatic identity. This is what's so important to me, is that we talked about social isolation earlier, but we didn't talk about becoming a member of a deviant group, did we? We talked about peer groups, but not deviant peer groups. So what do you think that looks like? A deviant peer group. Yeah, it could be gangs. So, in all of the members in the gangs, I'm not going to say 100%, but I'm going to say the majority, probably about 90% or so, have this traumatic identity which leads to persistent victim or aggressive behavior because that's all they know, because that's all that's been modeled for them. No one taught them how to respect another human being because they weren't respected. The adults in the home don't respect each other. So how do they know how to respect another human being? Just go to the corner store and get a box of how to respect. This leads to my favorite topic, epigenetics. I love this. So epigenetics, and you've probably heard talk about it. And what it does is it changes our genes without changing our DNA. And I kind of like, it's going to be real short. So let's pretend that we had a script for a screenplay. A screenplay. How about that? A screenplay. And so that's the DNA. A screenplay is what it is. And so we have all these actors and actresses, so those are cells and genes, and we're going to change dialogue, all of that. And then we have Woody Allen, and we have Steven Spielberg. Those are our epigenetic folks. They got the same screenplay. You think you're going to get the same movie? Nope. So what happens is Woody Allen puts his little 2 pieces in and puts in his personality, and you get this screenplay, and it's probably going to be in black and white, you know, because that's a Woody Allen thing. And then Steven Spielberg is going to do his thing, and then you're going to have all this wonderful orchestral music because that's his thing, right? Steven Spielberg loves orchestra. They've changed our genes. They've changed how the screenplay will look, but they didn't change the screenplay. So with epigenetics, but we're not on Explorer, so that's okay, just X that out. Some of the implications of that is there may be some in utero developmental delay, right? Just kind of like fetal alcohol syndrome. There's also the predisposition to trauma. There's also a predisposition to resiliency. There's also this idea that it's, like I said earlier, responsible for the body's inability to heal, not take care of all those free radicals running around. And most often, this is a similar, likened to cancer and Alzheimer's because it reduces our plasticity when we have too much or not enough. And cancer, of course, we know is just all kinds of stuff going crazy and replicating at a rapid pace, right? Okay, enough about that. Your turn. I told you were going to take one of these, and I meant it. So what you're going to find in front of you, Cheryl, can you help me pass those out? And just put clumps down. The ACEs, 10 questions, that's it.
Thank you so much for that presentation. It was so fascinating. I was just wondering if you could tell me more about what the difference is between, or when you know a person who has experienced PTSD, that person is hardwired then to that, that they kick into that fight or flight behavior because that's built in, it's hardwired in them. So if you could tell me, how is that healthy and how is that not healthy? If you could expand on that.
You know what, it's one of those case-by-case things, and I'm not trying to avoid your answer, your question. It depends on resiliency, which we'll talk about after the ACEs. We all have resiliency. However, you, Philip, may have 6 cups of resiliency, where V, sitting next to you, only has 4 cups of resiliency. When you arrive at the same stressor, you use less of your reserve than V does. Does that make sense?
Good point. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, V.
Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate it. You have fight or flight in there. And I just wanted to ask about, my understanding, there's also nature-nurture responses too, that I've heard of. And I guess a lot of times people think that, all mentally ill people react out with fighting. And I don't think that that's always true. And especially for women, they're more often to go to the nurture
Right.
Program,
Right.
as a way of, as a matter of resiliency or dealing and coping with the current stressor or fight or whatever you want to call it.
Right. You're exactly right. Women tend to withdraw. We withdraw and we find something that we want to take care of. We go water the plants, we go sweep the floor, we go pick up the neighbor's dog if we don't have a dog. Right? That's what we do. We go call the neighbor and say, hey, can I buy you a cup of coffee? It's just too much. Yes.
I know you're going to get some resiliency, but I guess I just wanted to put out there before we take this that, you know, what you covered is the sort of medical side of it, right? The way that we change, right, at an epigenetic level, the way our brains change. And I think it's important to remember that there is neuroplasticity and there is that ability to learn how to calm and how to get back to a place where you have different reactions to stress beyond fight, flight, or freeze. Because sometimes when we split it up and we do the ACEs part, it gets really heavy.
It does.
Right?
It really does.
And for people who see themselves reflected with 4 or more, it can feel very pathologizing without the second piece. So just to kind of underscore that you're going to get to that second piece where healing happens.
It does. So what I'd like for you all to do is just kind of go through and do your ACEs. It's only going to take like 2 minutes. Just go ahead and score your ACEs. Okay? If you've done so, go ahead and raise your hand.
Just 60 seconds.
Okay. All right, so a lot of people have already done so. It's really quick, 10 questions, right? I don't want to know your score. If you want to share your score with anyone next to you, in front of you, behind you, that's your business. I don't want to know. I want you to know your score. And I want you to know that even whatever background you've come from, nobody gets through this life unscathed. None of us. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about PTSD. Last week, or last meeting, Dr. Watson talked about PTSD, and she said that later on it could show up 6 or 7 months later. How can PTSD show up, and how does somebody deal with it? And I'm very concerned about that because if a police officer is experiencing PTSD and then 6 months later it shows up while he or she is on patrol or working, I don't know what they call it, but isn't there an element of danger for the public to have that experience with the police while they're experiencing PTSD and they're holding weapons and guns and...
Okay, and so what I know to be true about Portland Police Bureau is they have mental health providers, and all of their officers, when they're involved in traumatic events, shootings, that kind of thing, some of them are strongly encouraged and some of them are actually told to go seek mental health, right? So yes, generally speaking, PTSD is not diagnosed until you've had the symptoms for 6 months. That's according to the DSM, you know, the big Bible that all mental health providers use, all right? It's not diagnosed. Anything prior to that 6 months is called acute stress, okay? All right, so is everyone done their ACEs? Done your ACEs? Okay, so what I need for you to know is that yes, we all have something. And I need for you to kind of think about why you've chosen the profession that you've chosen. When you look at what you've endorsed on your ACEs, then have a real conversation with yourself about why you've chosen the profession that you've chosen. Okay? Let's talk about resiliency, because this is heavy stuff. This is way heavy stuff. Very introspective. Next slide. Resiliency. So now you have inner resources, you've got social competencies, you've got the village going on, you've got all these other wonderful things happening around you that help you not only to survive, but blossom. All right? So after doing the ACEs and sitting in this room, you're a flat tire. And here we come along with this big old tire pump. And we're going to fill you up with air and get you back on the road. Because now you have resiliency. You can make it to the next stop, right? So family support, positive family communication, all of that. I like to use the example, especially for those working in law enforcement. And then I tell them, you know, you probably ain't gonna like me, but you know, this is the truth. So you run up on this little kid, and it's a resource school officer. And it's like the teacher wants this child out of the room, male or female, don't matter. And it's like, what's wrong with this child? This child has family support, right? Got mom and dad both in the home. Do they have positive family communication? Well, I don't know. It depends on who you ask. Because mom and dad believe children should be seen and not heard. So is that positive family communication? Older adult relationships. Not so much, because in this culture, children don't associate with adults and adults don't associate with children. You have to have your come of age before that happens. Caring other adult relationships. Caring neighborhood. You don't know if you're living in a caring neighborhood because you just moved to the United States 6 weeks ago. How do you know your neighborhood? What about caring school climate? Of course not. You know why? Because you don't speak English very well. And you were in the 6th grade when you left your home country, and now you're in the 3rd grade because you don't speak English well at all. Parent involvement in schooling? Not so much, because you speak English better than they do. We can all look at what we have as resiliency. And I invite all of those who deal with the public, and I invite this board to provide training and opportunities for development for our police force, so that they understand what resiliency determinants are and how they differ for everyone they meet, no matter what their color or age. Does our community value youth? Not so much. Do we see them as resources? No, we're still of that. Children should be seen and not heard. So how are we going to make sure that these children who have some ACEs on board become productive adults?
Restorative justice.
Sounds like one good
That's a
answer.
good start.
Yes, Senator.
Looking at the resiliency determinants, I find it interesting that having a spiritual life is absent from the list. Could you speak to that?
Because there are some folks who have a sense of spiritual connectedness to things that aren't, as we consider them, spiritual or religious. There's a spiritual connectedness to things that aren't religious.
And I'm speaking to the word spiritual,
Right.
as opposed to religion.
Religion, I get it. So it hasn't been determined that it is one of those resilience determinants when it comes to physical or emotional or community resiliency. It is when it comes to, and there's one other category of social determinants that I did not include because it comes to the medical part of resiliency. And I don't know why the spiritual resiliency, that spiritual determinant, is more important in medical than it would be in any of these other fields. But unfortunately, that's where it falls out.
That's fascinating
I know.
and troubling.
Okay. So now what you folks should have in front of you is the resiliency questionnaire. And I invite you, it's coming if you don't have it, and I invite you to look at it and see what all your little resilient factors are. I also invite you to take these with you when you leave tonight and use them to open conversation. Open conversation about how, with this information, you can change your community. How with this information and the conversations that you can have, there will be no need for a COAB. How with this information and conversation, we can actually start maybe not singing Kumbaya, but we can sing Kumbaya. Right? I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. And before you, can I just say one thing? I want to thank you, Cheryl, Josh, and Sin, for coming tonight and for doing such a fantastic job of outlining trauma and trauma-informed care and explaining the adverse childhood experiences. And I wanted to take a small attempt at trying to sort of summarize and tie up some loose ends, because when we were asked to do this presentation, it was really about the relationship between trauma and mental health. And I feel like there was something needed. We needed to all understand it, where sort of we all converge. What are our commonalities? What are the things that we all share? Not what's different, but what everyone in this room can relate to. And the one thing that everyone in this room can relate to, whether we want to publicly admit it or not, is that we've all experienced in some form or another trauma. And that trauma, the reason we wanted to give the presentation today is that trauma doesn't happen in a vacuum or in isolation. It impacts us in different ways. And that trauma manifests itself in different ways. And perhaps if we all had a better understanding of what trauma is, the impact it has on us personally, then the impact that it can have on systems, the impact it can have on organizations, that we can then start the conversation of moving to a greater sense of basic humanity. Because we are now dealing with what unifies us. We are now at a place where we can understand what it's like to be hurt. We are now understanding what it's like to be on a collective journey for healing, and it changes effectively and fundamentally changes the way that we engage one another, whether I am a mother to a son, whether or not I'm a police officer working with someone in the community, whether I'm a COAB member working collectively in the community with police officers partnering for effective change. So I really hope that we can take from the message today that this is really about the thing that unifies us, that at the points where we can converge for effective change, because we're all impacted by it. And we should all be concerned with our collective and individual mental health. So I want to say thank you to you all, and thank you to the peer community that also shared with us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Any last minute details? Yes, Ime. I can't hear you.
I just want to make sure that all of us get a resiliency form, because
A resiliency form?
Yeah.
You need the
We didn't get
resiliency
one.
form in order to go forward.
I need it. I need one.
Make sure that there's some extra resiliency forms, okay? Anything else? Meeting is adjourned. Oh, Nancy? Would you stand?
Wait.
Okay, hold on 1 second. Hold on, please. The meeting is not quite adjourned. Please. Nancy? Excuse me, please. Someone has the floor.
Just use this mic. Here. You can even sit down. Thank you.
There was a sweep downtown today of homeless people that had finally found a place to rest. And it was quite a few police officers. It was park rangers, and it was, I believe, a sheriff also. And we were there to make sure that certain things were handled with a balanced treatment rather than scaring these people more than they're already fully traumatized with their lifestyle. And we did do some filming, but it was a range of different reactions amongst the officers that we talked to. And so I'm just wondering if we can do better on training when they're called upon in these situations, because it's my understanding that somehow there was a court case that sweeps weren't being allowed, and I couldn't get an answer whether that's the case or not. And I'd really like to know that.
Okay, we'll see if we can have that answer for you by the next meeting. Okay? Meeting's adjourned.